So, good afternoon, friends and esteemed colleagues. It's great to be here as chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus. I'd like to welcome all of you to our informational briefing on comprehensive immigration reform. We have convened a great group of community advocates, business leaders, and policy experts to receive updates on the status of comprehensive immigration reform at a federal level, to hear a historical narrative on immigration reform as well, and to provide a forum for community members to voice concerns and comments. It is an important time for our immigrant population, and I'd like to thank all of you for your hard work and persistence on one of the most important policy issues facing our time. At the state level, we have been moving forward with good public policy that seeks to wholly integrate our immigrant community into our society and bring them out of the shadows. This year, we have several bills working and moving through the legislature that would directly impact immigrants, including AB 60 by Assemblyman Luis Alejo that would allow undocumented drivers to obtain a driver's license if they meet certain requirements, and my SB 23 that would establish a task force within the governor's office to provide recommendations on immigrant integration, implementation of federal immigration reform, and the establishment of an Office of New Americans. Despite being home to approximately 10 million immigrants, California has not put forward a bold, comprehensive approach to fully integrate new American immigrants into our state. During the 20th century, the nation launched a movement involving federal, state, and local governments, business, labor, unions, schools, and social organizations to help integrate immigrants into our society. Currently, however, few of these programs exist and are minimally funded and uncoordinated. California should be leading the nation in integrating immigrants into our society because successful integration of new American immigrants is essential to California's future growth and sustainability. At the state level, immigrants pay roughly $5.2 billion in state income taxes and $4.6 billion in sales taxes each year. Additionally, our state's local economy benefit a great deal from economic contributions of our immigrants. It is vital that California be ready to receive and help integrate new Americans when immigration reform is passed, because citizenship and civic participation of all Californians is essential to the economic, societal well-being of our state. Let's build some momentum and ensure everyone is fully aware how important comprehensive immigration reform is to our state, but also how vital it is to our nation. With that, I would like to introduce Assemblymember V. Manny Perez, who is both the vice chair of our Latino caucus and is the chair of our Latino Caucus Immigration Reform Task Force. Assemblymember Perez, I want to thank you on behalf of our membership for your leadership on this panel today, and for your continued support and championing immigrant issues throughout the state. It's an honor to serve as the chair of the caucus with your leadership as the vice chair. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you as well, Senator Lara, and just want to say your efforts, your leadership, your dedication to the Latino caucus is also important to us, as well as it is your efforts on behalf of the immigrant community throughout the state of California. Really appreciate your efforts as well. And I want to say thank you to all of you that are here, the grassroots, the organizers, those of you that are from labor, those of you from agriculture, those of you that are the advocates. Really appreciate your presence here, and we look forward to our discussion as we move forward. And as well, Kashko Achadjian, thank you for being here. Mr. Hernandez, Ms. Garcia, Senator Canela. And I know that others as well are on their way. They'll be popping in and out. This is going to be about a 3-hour-long hearing because there's so much to discuss. Just as it is for all of us in this room today, the issue of paving a clear pathway to citizenship for undocumented individuals in this country is one of the highest importance, I'm sure to you, but as well as for me. And in the 56th Assembly District, which I share a border, we share a border with Mexico, I often see firsthand the negative impacts that our current immigration system has had on our families, our community, and our economy, as well even within our educational system. So it's no secret that California is home to the largest undocumented population in the country. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, in 2010, our state was home to an estimated 2.6 million undocumented people. Almost a quarter, 23%, of the nation's undocumented immigrants reside in California. It is therefore in the interest of the Latino caucus, as leaders in this great state, that work towards ensuring and improving the health and safety of all Californians to address the issue of comprehensive immigration reform as one unified, strong voice. And the purpose of today's hearing is to help us to do just that. The purpose of today's briefing is to help us ascertain the role of the Latino Caucus in the context of the immigration reform debate so that together we can move forward and advocate for immigration policy at the federal level that ensures a humane, fair path to citizenship and that addresses the dire need for labor to strengthen our economy. Today we will hear from various groups and industries who are stakeholders in the comprehensive immigration reform debate. As you see in your agenda, we will first discuss a historical and policy overview of comprehensive immigration reform. Then we will hear from 3 specific industries that heavily rely on immigrant labor. From there, we will hear from 3 labor unions. And lastly, but certainly not least, from our immigrant rights groups. So who'd like to go first? Angelica Salas, we have you listed here first as Executive Director of Coalition for Human and Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles, otherwise known as CHIRLA.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so very much to the Latino Caucus for their leadership on this an important issue and for all the work that you have done. And I take a special time to also thank the Republican members who co-authored a very important opinion piece stating the importance of immigration reform to the state of California, and that I want you to know that our community saw it and recognized it, is very appreciative of it, and I so appreciate your presence here today. So thank you very much first for having us. I'm going to be talking about where are we on the fight for immigration reform currently, and also what we have been doing in the field in order to gain bipartisan support for this important piece of legislation. As already stated by Representative Perez, California has much to gain for immigration reform. One out of every six child in California is the child of an undocumented parent. This matters a lot to our children. Most of these children are, 80% of them, over 80% of them are U.S. citizens. So we're not just talking about in a sense, what's happening to immigrants now who are adults, but really their children who are the future of this state. The Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles has been fighting for immigration reform since the late 90s, especially after the passage of the 1996 immigration reform law that made it more restrictive for individuals to bring in legally their U.S. citizen spouses, U.S. citizen family members. And we talk a lot in the country, we talk a lot about 1986, the amnesty of 1986. But everybody has amnesia about the 1996 law that was passed by a Republican Congress that made it extremely difficult for individuals, especially from countries like Mexico, Central America, to legally bring in their family members. And how did they do that? They imposed things like the 3 and the 10-year bar. So even though you are a U.S. citizen and can lawfully bring in your family member into the country, if that family member entered the country without legal status, as a penalty, have made them wait 3 years if they were in the country for 6 months undocumented, and 10 years additionally if they were in the country without legal status for a year. Now, this is what has brought us to a place where we have ballooned the undocumented population across the country, but certainly in California. It's the lack of legal means by which individuals can come into this, into the country, and the lack of ability once in the country, even if you have qualifying U.S. citizen relatives or qualifying legal permanent resident relatives, that you can't legalize your status. So that's why you have so many stories of heartbreak where you have U.S. citizen spouses or U.S. citizen parents who are in this situation, or you have children who are U.S. citizens, their parents who are undocumented, who can't legalize their status. I came to this country undocumented. My parents came undocumented. But when the laws were different during the time that we came, I had one U.S. citizen brother, and for his well-being and for his betterment, our whole family was able to legalize. That has changed. That is not possible today. We have many young children, U.S. citizens, whose hope family has been torn apart because we're not looking at their well-being. So what is being considered in Congress? What we're considering in Congress is bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform solution that includes the ability to fix our legal system, our immigration system, so that people can have legal entry into the country by reducing the backlogs, but also by reducing the ability, especially by eliminating visas for certain legal permanent residents who could otherwise qualify their relatives. It also includes the path to citizenship, different and very restrictive than any other immigration bill that we've ever had, but it gives individuals a provisional legal status that they will have for a period of up to 10 years before they become legal permanent residents. This is so different than we had during amnesty, where you would go forward, you'd have the provisional status for a short period of time, but immediately would become a legal permanent resident, which is a green card holder. This status provides individuals access to the green card, but you have to wait 10 years. So it's a restrictive process, but it is a process by which individuals can move forward. This is the proposal that had passed the Senate. We are stuck, however, because the House leadership has decided that they will not move on a comprehensive product, which exists in the House of Representatives, that has been crafted by both sides of the aisle, but is instead decided that they're going to take it piece by piece. And from our perspective, piece by piece without legal status means no reform at all. But the decision is piece by piece and no vote on citizenship. So across this country, what we have been moving forward is an aggressive campaign to move House leadership to take a vote on citizenship immediately. And especially for us in California, and why we're so important as California. In California, we have Representative Kevin McCarthy, who is the majority whip, the third most important Republican in this country, who, if we can convince him to move leadership, to take a vote on citizenship, to actually move in a direction like in the Senate, in terms of the politics of it, that we could actually move this situation forward. In addition to that, in California, we have 15 Republicans. From our perspective, 12 who could potentially vote on reform. So across this state, through the California Table for Immigration Reform, that brings together over 100 organizations, immigrant rights organizations, labor organizations, faith-based organizations, moving, again, an aggressive field campaign to convince our members of the Republican side of the aisle to vote on reform. And we have been having very positive results. We've had certainly Congressman Nunez, who's come forward in favor of legalization with a path to citizenship. Most recently, we had Congressman David Valadao from Hanford, who again came forward with his constituency in his district saying, yes, I'm for reform with a path to citizenship. Congressman Denham. We have much more work to do with all the rest of the members. But what we need to do right now is convince our California congressional Republican delegation that this is in the best interest of this country. As an immigrant rights organization, we are not yet satisfied with the entire product, because it is a very negotiated product. But what we do know is it includes a path to citizenship. It includes an expedited path for agricultural workers and for dreamers. For all the individuals who have been on temporary protected status for over a decade and a half, individuals who have never been able to travel to their country but have been allowed to work, they will, if they show that they've been here for 10 years, also enter into legal permanent residency status. And it fixes a lot of the legal system that currently prevents us from bringing in our family members in a legal way. So because of that, we keep moving forward. And I ask the Latino Caucus to keep moving forward, keep doing what you're doing, and keep going into your districts, especially where we have members of Congress who are who are Republican, to move this forward, to ask especially Representative Kevin McCarthy to be a leader for California, and in so doing, be a leader for the rest of this country. I want to just explain very quickly. This is about human beings. It's about our children's lives. It's about children who live in fear of parents being deported. But it's also about the fact that we have a system right now that is in the hands of cartels and of bad actors. We want a system that is controlled by bureaucrats, immigration bureaucrats, who are able to allow individuals to come in, stamp passports, stamp visas, allow individuals to come in through a legal process, instead of being in the hands of trafficking actors, of cartels, who are basically taking the business of immigration away from our bureaucrats. And so we have too many deaths, too many broken families. We're here to keep our families together, and in this moment in time, what we need to do is move forward a House process, and we need to do this urgently. We cannot wait another year. I've been working on this since the late 90s, and every year that moves forward, more lives, without a fix, more lives are destroyed and more families are destroyed, and we can't afford that in California any longer. Thank you.
And so I understand Mr. Peter Schey.
Yeah, me.
In the flesh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. We just got started, and looking forward to your testimony, and then as well Arnoldo Torres.
Great. Go ahead, Peter. Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation, and I'll try to be brief. I was asked to speak sort of on the big picture, kind of the historical picture, and so I think there will be several witnesses who will discuss some of the pros and some of the positive aspects of the current proposal in Washington. And so I wanted to give a bit more of a critical analysis of some of the shortcomings that we see and some of the ways that this could potentially be improved. Firstly, I think it's important to recognize that a large part of the current immigration crisis is caused by provisions that were enacted in 1996, and that nobody is seriously talking about repealing. Those provisions, at that time, Newt Gingrich was in charge of the Congress or running things, and President Clinton was in the White House. But they passed certain provisions that are drastic and that have drastically increased the undocumented population in the United States. They passed what are called the 3 and the 10-year bars. This is a brand new idea, but it basically says if you've been here for 12 months or longer illegally, even if you're married to a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, or you have a parent or child, and you can normally immigrate for the previous 100 years, you can immigrate. As of 1996, there was a 10-year bar if you'd been here for 12 months illegally. They created a lifetime bar if you've ever falsely claimed to be a U.S. citizen. That could be on a job, it could be anywhere, it could be at the border. So these 1996 laws are very draconian. They remain on the books. There's no serious effort to change them. What they've done is they didn't force people to leave the country. What they did was they bloated the undocumented population. They exploded the undocumented population simply because they blocked traditional avenues that people could immigrate. The kid turned 21, you could immigrate. Didn't matter if you'd been here illegally. Married U.S. citizen, green card holder, you could immigrate. Didn't matter if you'd been here illegally. It was obviously targeted at Central Americans and Mexicans, because those are, not all, but those are good 55% of the people who've been here illegally. So that's sort of the context that has brought us to having approximately 10 million undocumented people. I think that in figuring out how to fix the system, there are two basic approaches that are on the table. And one basic approach is comprehensive immigration reform. The other basic approach is incremental immigration reform. There's certainly pros and cons to both approaches. The obvious pro of immediate comprehensive immigration reform, at least if you look at what the Senate has come up with, is you potentially legalize maybe 11 million people. I've prepared an analysis, which I think your staff has gotten and has read, in which I think that given the stumbling blocks that are placed in the Senate's immigration bill, I don't think more than about 4.5 million. What will happen is you have about 1 million people who will legalize through ag jobs, because they're the influence of the growers and the union have united. So it's a straightforward legalization program, and a positive one that I would fully support. You look at the proposal for the DACA, recent arrivals, the Dreamers, that's fairly straightforward. I would support that. That's probably going to legalize another 1 million. So ag jobs will legalize 1 million. DACA will legalize 1 million. That'll take you down to 9 million. What's the program for the other 9 million? I have real problems with that program. I helped write the 1986 program. Back then I was a lot younger, less gray hair, and I worked for the Select Commission on Immigration and Refugee Policy. That was a bipartisan commission that drafted the legislation for Congress. That legislation, I'm not saying was fantastic, but at least the road to citizenship was something like 7 years. You know, you had temporary resident status, no huge stumbling blocks. After whatever it was, 2 years you could apply for a green card, then after 5 years you could apply for citizenship. It was relatively unchallenging. Even then, you know, a lot of people were denied. But when I compare that to the current program, at least what's come out of the Senate, it has certain provisions in it that I just find horrible. It has a provision that says nobody can get a visa through this program, permanent resident status, until all pending applications have been processed. Well, all pending applications is 4.5 million. Well, you'd say, well, throw a little bit more money at that, and in 5 years, 10 years, you should be able to clean up those 4.5. But the problem is, when you have a massive program like that, you always have what I call straggler cases. Might just be 1,000, might be 800, might be 500, but cases just get lost, don't get resolved, they're complicated, they think the person's a communist, don't ask me what. So you're always going to have these straggler cases. So that's a major problem to me, to say every single, what the Senate bill says is all, doesn't use most or the majority, it says all. That could be 30 years from now. It could never happen. That's number one. Number two, I find the provision that you have to maintain employment extremely troubling. I was just talking a couple of days ago. The guy's been here 15 years. He's from Guatemala. He's supporting his kids back in Guatemala. He goes out looking for work as a day laborer 7 days a week, and he told me he's lucky if he works 3 days a week. That guy's not going to make it through this program. So this idea that you have to have continuous employment, it's a bad idea. Number one, it ties people to the employer, so that they're going to be, you could have sexual abuse, you could have sexual harassment, you could have racial discrimination, you could have overtime you're not being paid for. And you know, nowadays you just go, I'm undocumented, you know, I'm gonna leave this job, I'm gonna find another job. It's a worse situation if you figure my green card's hanging on this. If I lose this job and I'm unable to find another job within 60 days, I'm potentially toast. I'm going to lose my status. So I think the idea of forced employment, that you must be employed, is going to have an unusual, harsh impact on day laborers, on women, and you know, I'm mostly concerned with the low-income immigrants, and that's the population that's going to be hit. And then you have the long time periods. You know, instead of sort of a 6-7 year path to citizenship, given those roadblocks, you're looking at a minimum of 15 years, an absolute minimum. And again, if some of these roadblocks, it could be, Lord knows what, could be 15. Now, on the other side of the coin, in my opinion, you have going forward an absolute no tolerance policy. So going forward, it's harsh, harsh, harsh. That's the trade-off. You want this amnesty, you want this legalization. going forward is zero tolerance. There's going to be tens of thousands of people charged criminally for illegal entry. You know, the road forward is going to be strict law enforcement. There's going to be massive increase in detention, massive increase in border enforcement. So the question that I think folks have to ask themselves, and it's a tough question. I'm not suggesting it's an easy question. This guy that I met a couple of days ago, he'd love to have some sort of temporary status, and if it's going to take him 20 years and going forward everybody else gets screwed, he probably doesn't care. It's a tough question. But there is a question, is this the right time for comprehensive immigration reform? You know, you could ask yourself, is this the right time to go to the U.S. Congress and get comprehensive LGBT reform? Well, 9 out of 10 people would say, not exactly. Let's wait a few more years, see if the complexion of Congress changes. We could potentially get LGBT reform tomorrow, but we may not like a lot of what's in there. Or could we get comprehensive wage and hour reform? So, you know, there's a question. The society is so polarized, and the Congress is so polarized, that could you get something called immigration reform? Absolutely. But is it going to be sort of the kind of legalization program that we would like to see? And probably not. And is the price you're going to have to pay for that exorbitant in terms of future enforcement? Absolutely. So the second approach, and again, there's pros and cons to both, but the second approach is more of an incremental approach. Have the Latino caucus come out and support an incremental approach. What does that mean in a nutshell? Well, number one, you hopefully wouldn't need these Republican, the Tea Party types, insisting on $40 to $80 billion in new enforcement, because that's the trade-off for like legalizing 11 million people at once, including folks who just came here recently with no family ties here. So if you do an incremental approach, you potentially don't need to give up that much in terms of enforcement. You go for a $5 billion enforcement program instead of a $40 or $80 billion. What would an incremental approach look like in a nutshell? Number one, I would take every person who's here, which I think is over 3 million people, who are in the system. They've played by the rules. They've come forward. They've applied for a visa, but they're in this federal pipeline. They face quotas. They've got a 3-year wait, a 6-year wait, an 8-year wait, but they're in the system. Department of Homeland Security knows who they are, where they are, their address, their phone number, their fingerprints, their cell phone number, their email, everything. Take those 3 million plus people, and whether you could do this through the White House, just like they did for DACA, or you could do this through legislation and just give them temporary status. You say, hey, you have to wait till you get to the front of the line to actually get your green card, but in the meantime, you can come out of the underground. You know, it's so funny. They're not in the underground for Department of Homeland Security. It doesn't chase them down and deport them. It's in their system. But for every other aspect of their life, they're living an undocumented presence. So you could take that population, what I would call the pipeline population, and Obama could do this tomorrow. And you could call on Obama to do this just for California. Of course, he'd never do it, but it'd be an interesting concept to say, we want to see you do the same thing that you did for these dreamers, who, by the way, have no statutory route to legalization. We want you to take these other folks, and you probably have at least 1 million in California, who are in the pipeline. They do have a statutory route, but they've got quota waiting periods. And just give them temporary status. Just give them deferred action status, which means they get a work permit. They come out of the underground. Number two, TPS. You've all heard of TPS, temporary protected status. There's like 500,000 Central Americans who've been living in California for 15 years on temporary protected status. Give them give them a green card status, not in 20 years. Give it to them in 3 or 4 or 5 years. They've already been living here for 15 years. They've played by the rules. Then you could do your ag jobs. You could do your DACA folks. And bam, you're up to 6 million people. But with a simple path to legalization. Now, that doesn't cover everybody, obviously, because it doesn't cover people who've recently arrived. So in a nutshell, those are the two approaches. I think it would be interesting to bat around the idea of having the Latino caucus send a letter to Obama and say, hey, just can you think about this? Do you know what you did for all those DACA kids, 500,000 kids? They have no statutory right to legalize, but you know they had ties here, they've been living here for a while. You decided to just give them what's called deferred action status, which is nothing more than it's a work permit, and you can travel. You can get permission to travel. Why don't we do the same thing for the 500 or 750,000 people who are living in California illegally, but they're in your system. Mm-hmm. They're not in our system. They cannot get driver's licenses. They're reluctant to report crime. So in our system, they're illegal. But strangely enough, in your system, in DAH system, they're actually in your system. They're in the pipeline. Why don't you give those people in California some temporary, not give them a green card, just give them deferred action status, same thing you're doing for the Dreamers. And boy, you'd solve a large part of the problem. So I think I would leave it at that. And grin.
Thank you for your testimony. I think you brought up many great points, and that's quite frankly why we're here as Latino Caucus and other members as well. So we have folks here from the Republican Party that are concerned about the issue, which I think is great. The fact that we're willing to sit here and work together on this issue, hopefully in the future. But I think that your points that you're making are great points. That's why we're here as Latino Caucus, to try to see what our next steps are going to be.
I really appreciate the opportunity and your interest and your concern in this issue.
And Mr. Torres, you have 7 minutes.
7 minutes. I want to begin by thanking you and congratulating the caucus for this informational hearing. I wish that caucuses throughout the United States and state houses would have done the same on more than one occasion between May and now. I think this is very, very important, and I encourage anything that can be done between now and October 1st to continue this dialogue in the districts with the community directly. Because as Peter said, and as Angelica has implied, this is very difficult. It's easy for someone like me, perhaps, people would think, to give you what we think ought to happen to people who don't have legal status. I'm born here. I've had relatives that were undocumented. I will have relatives that will be undocumented in years to come from Chihuahua. Great state. I know that you guys are all very discriminatory against Chihuahua, but I'm very proud of being from Chihuahua. There's too many from Michoacán and Jalisco, in my opinion. There should be more from Chihuahua. But so the reality is that it's a very difficult thing for us to provide our analysis, for me to provide my analysis, because it's not an easy thing to do what Angelica has been doing since 1990. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. It's almost a no-win proposition when you advocate on this issue. Peter and I did it back in the 70s, late 70s, and throughout the 80s. And there is no win-win here. It's a very difficult position to be in. But perhaps what differs us in the sense that of our perspective is that we have done this once before, and we can compare to a great extent the difficult positions that people like Angelica and Enrique and the others that will be testifying, as well as people in the business community, have. The difference in the 80s, which is a very important historical significance, is that it was as much a policy discussion then as it was political. In fact, it was more policy. Why? Because, as Peter indicated, there was a select commission. A great deal of time was spent on the policy. What you have today is more of a political discussion. What can pass Congress, as opposed to what will work? Peter gave you a very good analysis, and his analysis is an excellent piece of work that really tells you what is not going to work well. The legalization provisions will not work well. And that's exactly where we are today. The political debate at the national level is about it's about politics. It's about what can pass Congress, not what will work once it's passed in Congress. Very different distinction between our time in the 80s and now. The other very important distinction is that we would have never appeared in any, and we never appeared in any session, certainly not the ones that Peter organized, because they were all designed to be very aggressive and hold us accountable, those of us who are representing DC. We never supported the IRCA law. Not once did we ever testify in support of that bill. We never liked the bill. We never felt it was an answer to the problem, because we felt economics were the problem that caused the movement of people from an underdeveloped, developing country to a developed country. And unless you have economic solutions for an economic problem, you're never going to really deal with the problem honestly and directly and effectively. And we, in fact, were prophetic about that. We testified over 100 times, and we made these statements consistently in the House and the Senate. There is nothing different this time, except that it's worse now. This is really bad politics as opposed to policy. Other very important differences from or comparisons of the later or the previous year is that Hispanics had not been discovered. Now you are very important people at a time when, you know, before you all were born or before you even had your legs, nobody knew Hispanics that much in politics. Now everybody talks about the importance that Hispanics play. The problem is that there's not a substantive discussion about how people should respond to the needs of a community. The responses, again, are political. The Republican Party is concerned about losing. Some are. Ted Cruz doesn't give a hoot. Okay? Others in the party don't give a hoot. Democrats all have an interest. Everyone that's involved in this debate has very specific interests, either political, economics, or I want to be the mero in my community, in Coachella, in Los Angeles, in New York. This is not about policy, but it's a difficult call for the reasons that Peter talks about, because you have people who will come up to me because they will occasionally see me on television. They'll say, what do you think, Senor Torres? Should we support this or shouldn't we support it? The reality is that most of our people do not know what's in this bill for them to make up their own mind, and they have to make their own decision. Many people seem to have been saying that they want this bill, but I tell you very sincerely from anecdotal, because I certainly can't talk to 11 million people, I think there's a great deal of confusion. The difference, again, was in the 70s, we had countless meetings and town hall hearings throughout the United States on this issue. Countless. We were held accountable for what we were advocating. We had community representatives constantly coming to Washington. There were a number of problems that this created at times, but there was also such an important flow of information that kept the process very transparent and very honest. People knew that a legalization program was not designed to accommodate all of the undocumented that were in the United States in the 1980s. We never represented the bill as doing that. However, I have a speech here from the President of the United States in Las Vegas, in which he clearly implies that all 11 million people are going to be given the path to legalization in this bill. And as you've heard from Mr. Schey and as you heard from Ms. Salas, this bill does not accomplish that. This bill was never intended to accomplish that, because a legalization program is not designed to be an amnesty program. This is not an amnesty. If you want an amnesty, then everybody gets the slate clean, everybody comes in. This is not that bill. This bill was never going to accommodate 11 million people, and yet that is how it was represented to everyone. Going back to the issue of economics, in the 80s, we talked about the fact that major movements of human beings throughout the world are political difficulties, instability, economic instability. You have to deal with it economically. There isn't anything in this bill today, from the time that I addressed you in February at your caucus policy session in Los Angeles, not one single thing changed. Not only in the legalization program, understand this, the analysis that Peter has provided you, he analyzes provisions in the Senate bill that were in that bill in February. Nothing changed. Not one word changed in the Senate provisions. Okay? Not one single thing. Yet people are under the impression that all 11 million people will have a chance to come into the program, when less than half of that population will really have a fair chance to become a legal permanent and possibly a citizen of the United States. Very, very important distinction. In the 80s, we made it clear we're going to try to pass a bill that tries to accommodate as many people as we can in the simplest of ways. And the other thing that we're going to try to address is the needs of state and local governments. Why? Because in the bill in the 80s, this population became, if they went through the process correctly, after 2 years, permanent resident alien status. And as a permanent resident alien, you have a right to certain services that are being provided by state, federal, and local governments. The Congress passed the bill, the State Legalization Impact Assistance Grant provisions, that ended up providing almost $12 billion to states for the purposes of providing bare minimum services in healthcare and other social services for this population. There isn't anything in this bill that addresses that. However, you have an analysis by the Congressional Budget Office that says after expenses of this population, when they become legal, whether it be the ones who are in the queue now or the ones that come in as DACA or as the agriculture, they will generate $460+ billion from 2014 to 2023. They will expend 220-something million. A grand total net profit to the United States Treasury, $197 billion. And yet, the Senate bill or the House bills do not provide for any of that reinvestment of that money that this population will be generating to state and local governments to help that population integrate itself into American society. We're not talking about entitlement programs. We're talking about fairness. We're talking about common sense. You're going to try and legalize a population, but you're going to keep them out of the system for 10 or 15 years. Regardless of what illnesses that they acquire, it's secondary. Regardless of all of the money that they have paid into the system that they have had no chance to recoup, you have $197 billion in benefits. So you have a number of other difficulties, and I'll try to close the 7 minutes. Governor Brown.
You can, Mr. Torres,
Yes.
close in a minute or less.
There you go. Governor Brown issued a letter to the Senator of California on May 13th, in which the governor says in his letter, on the last page, to that end, I have asked my Secretary of Labor to identify all state special fund resources that can be used for the implementation of immigration reform, including fulfillment of employment requirements and assistance in learning English. Yet this governor's budget turned around and killed adult education in many regards for English language instruction. He not only did that, but you read the paper today that as a result of the federal sequestration and the UI benefits, there's going to be reductions in EDD. So what kind of implications in the EED reduction will that be on helping on dealing with employment requirements? Third, in healthcare, you may have another witness that will be coming in to testify. His policies in this state are in fact putting a burden on the network of community health centers that serve this population. And they're the only ones who can effectively serve them under federal law. They're allowed to serve undocumented workers and persons. But this governor's policies are not moving at this point in the direction of helping this population. They're moving away. So these are my recommendations. I would strongly urge you, as Peter has, to look at Peter's analysis and as a caucus, write the letter, accepting and proposing the recommendations that Peter has laid out in his analysis. The second is I would ask that you recommend that you would write a letter to the governor consistent with the legislation that Mr. Lara has introduced and ask him for an update on what the results have been of what he has asked the Secretary of Labor in his cabinet to provide information on, taking into consideration the actions that he has taken, his administration has taken since that letter was written through the budget. So I think these are very, very important, very, very real things that can begin to open up this discussion and allow you to decide probably at the beginning of November if you can come back and really address whatever Congress does. I would close by saying this. When I was in Washington, I walked away from the table many times when we were given a deal. We were offered certain provisions. We didn't accept those provisions. We said that's not good enough. We didn't do that in this bill. We gave the leverage to Mr. Schumer and Mr. McCain and the Gang of Eight and this administration. We have simply allowed ourselves to go along, to get along. Difficult call. If I was there, I would have made a different call. We made a call in those days that we would not support a bill that we did not think was the answer. But we also were able to still influence this legislation significantly, especially on the legalization provisions. So it's not about having your cake and eating it too. It's about using the leverage that's there, natural leverage. If we had not allowed Schumer and McCain and the others to negotiate on our behalf, in essence, who would they have negotiated for? Where would there have been a bill? What would have been the impetus? If the Hispanic community was saying, this is not good public policy. So, bottom line, this is not good public policy. It's not any better. In fact, it's worse than the one that we passed in '86. Thank you very, very much, and congratulations on the hearing.
If we could go ahead and move forward and get our third panel here as well. Can I get Caitlin Vega, legislative advocate for California Labor Fed, as well as Diana Telasan Torres, I believe, National Vice President, UFW, and Mr. Mike Garcia, President of SEIU. Caitlin, you want to go ahead and start us off?
Sure. Mr. Chair, members of the Latino Caucus and the API Caucus, thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak today on such an important issue. I was reflecting, watching all the coverage of the 40th anniversary of the March on Washington. It really feels timely to be talking about the current civil rights movement, and for us, the role of labor in that movement, because just as labor was part of the civil rights movement of the 60s, for us today, comprehensive immigration reform that is meaningful, that is real, that is truly a path to citizenship for a significant portion of undocumented workers is the top priority nationally, and it's the top priority for us here in California. And the reason for that is that we have seen from our unions, from our activism in the communities, from our community partners, that we really are not able to fulfill our mission, which is to build a path to the middle class for all workers, to allow workers to move out of poverty, to create economic self-sufficiency for themselves, and to pass something better on to their children, the American dream. We cannot achieve that without immigration reform. And I want to say, I too was moved by not only the passion, but also the compassion of the previous panel of employer speakers. So I want to say that before I go into speaking from kind of the worker perspective and labor's perspective. Unfortunately, not all employers view immigrant workers with the same level of compassion. And so instead, what we see oftentimes from unscrupulous employers is the threat of immigration consequences for any worker who ever speaks out about unfair or illegal working conditions. And so we feel like not only are we not able to bring people out of the shadows, not able to extend or expand the American dream, but instead what we see is the use of immigration status as a weapon against workers who are trying to make a better life for themselves, and really an obstacle to the state in trying to enforce our basic labor laws. There's a recent report from the National Employment Law Project entitled Workers' Rights on ICE, How Immigration Reform Can Stop Retaliation and Advance Labor Rights. It's a terrific report, and really what they find is the widespread use of these kinds of immigration threats, whether it's a day laborer who says at the end of the day, wait a second, you promised me that I was going to get paid for 6 hours work and all you're giving me is $10, and the employer says, are you threatening me? I think I'm going to call the local police and report you, knowing, of course, that that's going to trigger a deportation hold. And in fact, in the process of writing this report, the National Employment Law Project found many, many workers who ended up in deportation proceedings, forced to leave their families, and the potential of returning to a home where they had no one, where they didn't speak the language, where they hadn't been in so many years, all of these things simply because they tried to exercise their rights under the law. For us, this is an unsustainable situation and an unjust situation, and it gives us great urgency in trying to achieve comprehensive immigration reform. In addition, we think that there are things the state can do. We're sponsoring 3 bills this year that are aimed at these kinds of employer threats against workers when they try to speak out and when they try to improve their working conditions. And we think that there's tremendous potential for the Latino Caucus and for California to help shape this debate, to say we can't say no. I mean, I think we're in a position we can't say no. We have to win real change because too many people are suffering, and what's at stake is simply too great. So we have to fight to win comprehensive immigration reform, but we should also be fighting to make it better. And I think, as many of the original panelists talked about, that really is our charge as the people who believe in this and are fighting for it, that as we mobilize to win votes, we're also focused on strengthening, preserving the parts of the Senate bill that we like, strengthening the parts and hopefully changing some of the parts that we don't like. I don't think there's any value to very many people in enacting a comprehensive immigration reform that leaves half of the undocumented population out and then requires things like E-Verify so that those people are never able to find a job. I mean, it just I think creates a situation even more dire for those workers who will be subject to tremendous exploitation. And it sets up a situation of kind of false promises for the entire Latino community, which I think as many people here know, most families have people in different statuses. Most people, it's not a situation where you can't trick anybody into believing they got a comprehensive immigration reform if that's not what it is. If there's a program that is really going to be full of so many obstacles that it won't bring meaningful opportunities to legalize and become citizens, then I think that certainly the political consequences will be real, and I think we all appreciate the personal consequences on those families who will not be able to benefit, and on those workers who won't be able to benefit. So I think we in labor see our role as being strong advocates, bringing a sense of urgency to this issue on behalf of the workers we represent and on behalf of the workers that we don't represent. We try every day in this Capitol to speak on behalf of the most vulnerable workers in this state, and we know that many of them are immigrant workers. And so we bring a tremendous sense of urgency in wanting to get this done, and also wanting to make sure that what we do is something that we can be proud of, and that this truly is the civil rights movement of this generation. It's a great honor to be part of it, and it's a great honor to be up here with people like Mike Garcia, who is one of the reasons that labor is here in such strong support of immigration reform, something that people wouldn't have always assumed would be the case. But because we've had such a deep commitment to building a path out of poverty for immigrant workers and to embracing that movement within the labor movement, I think that puts us in a good position to fight for the best possible immigration reform we can achieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Kaylin. I appreciate your words. And if we could move forward, it doesn't matter, but either Diana Torres or Mike Garcia, either one is fine.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the invitation and the Latino Caucus for really putting this event together here. Arturo Rodriguez could not be here today. He's in Washington, D.C. at the White House in a very timely meeting talking to top officials about next steps on immigration reform, and he's also among some other civil rights leaders who will be meeting with the president later on to celebrate the 50-year anniversary of the March on Washington, and also to talk about next steps in that arena. So, you know, we have definitely the civil rights leaders from the last 50 years, their shoulders to stand on. And really this March on Washington, among the core issues that they talked about was immigration reform, and comprehensive immigration reform at that. And so we know with farm workers, the vast majority of farm workers are undocumented in this country. The federal government says that 50% are undocumented. We believe with the UFW that it's more like 70 to 80%. And this really has a huge impact, as Caitlin mentioned, when it comes to how vulnerable they are, and especially at the workplace. And so we really want to make sure that everything is done as possible this year so that we have comprehensive immigration reform. We know that the industry the agricultural industry will be impacted greatly. And this is part of the reason why the UFW for the last more than a decade now has been working on a path to citizenship for farm workers, and decided to really work with the ag industry, with employers, on a bill or specifically used to be ag jobs, but this year specifically to negotiate something with the provisions on ag that would be included in both the House and a Senate bill that would really include what the needs for farm workers are, and at the same time the ag industry. And that's really something that's very unique. We don't often agree on much, but this is certainly an issue that we have very strongly advocated for many times together. And so, you know, this is going to be a huge impact. As Barry Bedwell mentioned, it's probably going to be about 1 million farm workers throughout the country who are undocumented, who would be impacted. A third of farm workers are here in California. So it is a huge percentage of farm workers who are here in the state. And so right now, this stakeholder agreement, as we call it, that the UFW negotiated with the ag industry really says that farm workers would have a path to citizenship, that they would first have to demonstrate that they'd worked 100 days at some point between 2011 and 2012, and that they would be able to have access to temporary residence, and then they'd be able to apply for permanent residence after working for at least 100 days per year for 3 years, or 150 days per year for 5 years. So they'd be on a quicker path to citizenship, but we also know that they're working incredibly hard in the fields right now. And so one of the things, in addition, although this is certainly an issue that for us has been very difficult to negotiate, and I know the employers and the UFW had over a dozen negotiating sessions this year, and this issue of guest workers is something that's included. We would have a new guest worker program with protections that we negotiated for workers, and it also has a more streamlined process for employers. However, at hand, we now have Congressman Goodlatte, who is now proposing and has now passed through the Judiciary Committee in the House, a bill that is, to us, worse than the Bracero legislation. It really would lower wages that are already low for farm workers. It would impact farm workers in many, many ways. Those that are already here, who, according to Goodlatte, would now be would have to self-deport, basically. They'd have to go back to their country, and if they'd want to, they could become guest workers with no path to citizenship in the future. This is unacceptable to us, and we certainly know that in the agreement that we have with the employers, that they have agreed that they are going to oppose the Goodlatte legislation. So we really want to ensure that the House members know that we need comprehensive immigration reform. The piecemeal legislation that the House Judiciary Committee is coming up with is unacceptable. We need to ensure that we have citizenship, and that really is the question at hand right now. As Angelica Salas mentioned, who's one of our partners at the national level and here at the state level, Congressman McCarthy is huge here in the state. He is our majority whip. Although he says, "Why are you targeting me?" sometimes, clearly he's in the leadership. Clearly he's in the state with the largest number of farm workers. He's in a state with the largest number of immigrants. And so we want to ensure that he hears a clear message that California needs comprehensive immigration reform, and that he is in the leadership and that we're going to hold him accountable. So we want to ensure that this question of how we should proceed and how we go to conference is the fact that we need a vote on citizenship. And as majority whip, he knows that we can get something through. And the Senate bill has bipartisan support. It has the support from many, many organizations. And if ag can come together with the United Farm Workers and agree on something, we're sure that we can come up with something in the House. So we want to make sure that the pressure is being felt from all areas. And so this is a very timely discussion, and appreciate the fact that you all are holding this hearing. We did bring some materials, so if you'd like to have any more information about the bill that Congressman Goodlatte is proposing specific to farm workers, and as I would call it, the Bracero legislation, we do have some of that material. And I'd also like to say that we had a huge caravan, and I know that Angelica and many other organizations participated this month. The whole state, many, many organizations, labor came down to our backyard. The United Farm Workers happens to be, our headquarters are in Kevin McCarthy's district. So we had many, many guests who came, hundreds and hundreds of people. We had farm workers from 13 different farm worker communities, all the way up from Santa Rosa down to Oxnard. And we really need to continue that type of pressure, but at the same time, we look to decision makers as well to put that pressure on. So thank you so very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. If we could move forward, Mr. Garcia, and then we'll raise some questions. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasant surprise. I had heard that you weren't going to be able to make it, but thank you for being here, Mr. Garcia.
Sure. I think the moment is upon all of us right now, so I felt an obligation to be here and talk to you. I want to thank you, Manny, and Senator Lara for putting this together. It really draws attention and shines a light on the most important social issue of our time. And we are so close to finally legalizing the major share of the 11 million hardworking immigrants in this country that I think all can relate to or connect to in one way or another, especially the Latino caucus. What I'm going to talk about is about perspective from labor organizing, from an organizer's perspective, and we can listen to the activists and the pundits on the bill till the cows come home, but I don't have enough time in my life to wait for the perfect bill to be passed through the Congress. Now's the time where we've come very, very close, and we are very, very close. And just listening to the individuals around the room from business, their support is music to my ears to hear, the high-tech industry, the grower industry, the hotel industry, and construction industry all come together and want to work together with the immigrant rights and labor groups to finally win comprehensive immigration reform so we all get what we need out of it and what we believe will provide justice for our workforce. But everybody shares one thing. The human lives that are involved, and our local union is highly immigrant, highly undocumented, and as Lorena knows, we are subject to a lot of enforcement issues that have cost thousands of our members' jobs, divided thousands of families, and ruined lives of many of our janitors over the last few years across the state. So this is a very personal issue for us, and we can't lose track, in spite of all the politics and all the rhetoric, that we must do everything we can to win all we can, and think like organizers here, which is we win what we fight for. And this is what I teach my members. This is what I teach, everyone around me, that, it's a fight. And as long as we fight and we fight together, we will win together. And we're so close right now. Really, how this relates to labor and immigration connect, it is one in the labor movement. When you look at the economic disparity, the huge and growing economic disparity in this country that is growing and growing, you look at the economic patterns, you look at the economic structures of this country as businesses move towards a contingent workforce, an outsourced workforce, temporary employment agencies, contracting out their responsibilities to workers, contracting out their responsibility to provide health care and living wages to workers is on the rise and on the increase. In Alameda County, these low-wage jobs have increased by 30% and are now 25% of the workforce. In LA County, already the low-wage worker capital of the world, it's risen 7% in the last year, and it's now 39% of the workforce. Sacramento's risen 52%, these jobs, and it's now 31% of its employment structure. The Department of Labor predicts that in about 6 short years, the majority of the American workers will be working in these low-wage contingency jobs or retail jobs without hope, without health care, without a union. And that's where our economy is going. That's where America is going. And the immigration piece of this is vitally connected to that. Labor has historically been at the center of improving quality of life for immigrant workers and future generations that have created the great middle class in this country before it had been systematically dismantled. Meanwhile, corporate wealth is on the rise, $8 trillion in profits. They're sitting on $2.2 trillion of cash. $2.2 trillion of cash as we sit here today. So the money is there. It is just not fairly and equally distributed, unfortunately. And immigration reform will change that. It will bring wealth and it'll bring prosperity to our communities. It'll bring citizenship and an ability for people to participate in civic participation and make decisions that affect their lives and their livelihoods. The California economic boost will be $8 billion, $327 billion in revenue So there's a lot of money we're talking about here if these workers are given the right to provide for their fair share. It creates enduring prosperity and pathway to economic recovery and to rebuild public budgets. And it revitalizes communities. When there are good jobs, when the workforce is stabilized, they're able to work in better jobs. And this is how it connects to labor organizing. And with labor working together with the immigrant community, we can create good jobs, union jobs, like our parents had when we had a strong and vital labor movement. We had a strong and vital middle class that was contributing robustly to our economy, consuming, buying houses, buying school clothes, buying cars, buying products for their family. The economy was robust. When working people don't have the ability to consume, the economy is in a spiraling, will continue to spiral down and create more of this economic despair on our communities. The Latino community, in particular, and on all working class communities, suffer the most because these are the folks that are in these jobs. And these are the folks, and immigrant workers have been the ones that have taken most advantage of and by their employers to create these jobs that creates poverty and creates a community that is rife with crime and poor education and no opportunity for our youth. So the immigration reform for the labor movement is vital. It's vital to uplifting our economy. It's vital to rebuilding the middle class. It's vital to creating good jobs and more good jobs for American working people. And it's the pathway as well to creating the public resources we need to help lift us up out of our economic budget crises that we endure every day. That's not to say that corporate America doesn't have its obligation to pay its fair share too, because we feel very strongly that that must happen as well. But give working people, give these immigrants, there's 2 million folks out there, the ability to pay their fair share. They're ready to stand up and pay their fair share and challenge business to pay their fair share. They just need legal status and stability, as the gentleman here from the ag business stated, stability in their lives to be able to do that. So I can't tell you enough as a labor leader how important and how connected the labor movement is to the immigrant rights struggle and in the work of the Latino Caucus, because I know it's an issue that impacts us all and we feel deeply personal about. But we are one on this, and we are one with business. And I applaud you for bringing these business gentlemen together and make the statements they made today. I think were absolutely phenomenal, and how they have turned around and realized that even immigration reform and legalizing these folks is going to benefit their own businesses and the economy as well. So it's just a question of what more do we need to do to make this happen. And specifically, we have several weeks to go, and the battle is on in Congress. We have, 33 Republicans in California, or 33 congressmen in California, and we have our share of Republicans. And I'm not here I'm bipartisan today, but there's a lot of Republican brothers that want to join our cause. So what do we need to do to help them get there in their debate that is raging in their party? And I think that's really what this comes down to. And if we have relationships with any of these folks that are still undecided on this issue in Congress, we need to exercise our relationships. And we all have relationships in business. We have relationships on the other side on each side of the aisle. We need to move those relationships and say, let's do this now. Comprehensive immigration reform, not piecemeal, but comprehensive. It is there for us. It's close for us. And I can guarantee you that the major share of these 11 million folks will be legalized, lives will be stabilized, their jobs will be stabilized, the families will be stabilized. And that's really what this is about, the human lives that we're trying to impact here in our grasp. It'll never be a perfect bill, and the intellectuals can debate this till the cows come home, but I'm not an intellectual, I'm an organizer. And I call on you all to join us and think of what we can do to move those conversations within our parties, within our relationships, both sides of the aisles, and in business, that we need comprehensive immigration reform. The business community won't get what they want unless they agree to the bigger picture. We won't get what we want unless we understand there's some business needs that must be addressed. Let's work together and let's get this done. And whatever you can do between now and the next few weeks, you know, let's do it. We've changed the debate in this country. We've got the momentum. Now let's bring it home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. And if I can have the following speakers come forward. Enrique Morones, President of Border Angels. Reshma Shamasunder, Executive Director of California Immigrant Policy Center. Arturo Carmona, President of Presente.org. Efrain Delgado, Dreamer Representative from the California Dream Network. So Enrique, if I could have you speak first.
My name is Enrique Morones. I'm the founder of an organization that we started 27 years ago called Ángeles de la Frontera, or Border Angels. We're best known for putting water in the desert so that people don't die, but we do a lot more than that. We started in the canyons of North County, where people live before there was a wall. And they live, a lot of these people would work in the farms and the fields of North County, San Diego. And then we expanded our efforts to going out into the Imperial Valley. And you've been with us. You've been with us when we've done our national caravans across the country, and we're not going to forget that. Let's also remember that tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. And not only did Martin Luther King have a dream, but we also have a dream. We also have a dream, and what we want is humane immigration reform. I haven't heard that word today too much. We don't want just comprehensive immigration reform. We want humane immigration reform. Before 1994, which was a watershed year in this issue, you had the passing of a very hateful bill promoted by the then governor of California, Pete Wilson, Proposition 187. You had the North American Free Trade Agreement. You had the Zapatista movement because people said, hey, we need to be able to live off the land. And you had something that has greatly impacted immigration to this day. And the whole world has seen it. It's called Operation Gatekeeper. A wall was built between San Diego and Tijuana, the two biggest border cities. And I'll never forget what a previous president said in the 1980s. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Yet in 1994, the U.S. government puts up a wall. Before that wall was built, 1 or 2 people would die crossing the border before there was a wall. Since 1994, when that wall was first built on October 1st, 10,000 human beings have died. 10,000 human beings have died because of that wall. And it's not just a number. Marco Antonio Villaseñor was one of those people. He was a 5-year-old little boy that crossed for the number one reason all of us in this room are here today. Our parents wanted us to have a better life. And he crossed with his dad, and as he crossed with his dad, he became very thirsty. And he asked his father for some water. But his father wouldn't give him any water. So he asked the next man and the next. He asked 18 men for water. Neither would give the boy water. And why not? They were already dead. 19 human beings perished in Victoria, Texas in May of 2003. But it's not only boys and men, it's also women, because the number 2 reason people come here is family reunification. They want to be with their loved ones, like Lucrecia Dominguez wants to be with her husband. And she, like the 19 people that died in Victoria, Texas, and the 10,000 people that have died since 1994, have no line to get into. There is no Statue of Liberty for them. No give me your poor, you're tired, you huddled masses. They have a wall. And people are forced to go around, over, and under this wall, dying every day. Lucrecia crosses with her son Jesus, 15 years old, and Nora, 7. And Lucrecia, after the smuggler abandoned her, literally dies in the arms of Jesus, her 15-year-old son Jesus. This is happening every day. When we had the firestorm in 2007, right here in California, Guadalupe Beltran went home to bury her mother. And when she came back, the smuggler says, cross now, the Border Patrol will be busy with the fire. So she crossed. They didn't find her for 4 days. In the hospital, totally charred. Her husband could not recognize her, leaving behind 4 orphan children. But they don't only die crossing the border, they die once they're here. Luis Ramirez, brutally beaten to death in Shenandoah, Pennsylvania, simply because he was Mexican and his wife was white. Marcelo Lucero, kicked to death when 7 good Americans wanted to have a beaner boot party. They find him in Long Island, New York, and they kill Marcelo Lucero. He's not from the great country of Mexico. He's from the great country of Ecuador. But all of these people, whether they're from Zacatecas or they're from, wherever, Zimbabwe. They're human beings. They're human beings. And what we have going on now, we have an immigration bill that's being proposed, and the Senate added some deadly amendments at the end. My dad passed away 3 weeks ago. My dad was Aztec Indian. And the Aztecs, in their history, used to have human sacrifices. What this immigration bill will do, as it is now, will be committing people to a death sentence. 10,000 people is not enough? If you double the wall from 700 miles to 1,400, which is what they propose, it's a 2,000-mile border, you're going to have more deaths. If you double the Border Patrol from 20,000 to 40,000, you're going to have more Anastasio Hernandezes, Sergio Hernandez, Marco Antonio Villaseñor, more people that are killed by Border Patrol. We cannot accept that part of the bill. We cannot accept it. I like what Peter Schey said, and he might be the best analyst in this room. And Peter Schey mentioned that an incremental immigration bill is the best way to go. I know it'd be great if the 11 million people had, we're not looking for legalization, first of all, because there's no human being that's illegal. We're looking for documentation. So if these 11 million have a pathway to documentation, let's do it in a humane way. When our African-American brothers and sisters 50 years ago marched on Washington, they weren't saying, okay, we're going to give you the right to vote, but you have to sacrifice 300 people every year. They would have said no. And we need to stand up and say no, because what happened in 1994 with Operation Gatekeeper, that has been a death sentence. And this new bill, as it is now, with the amendments in the Senate, and we know Congress is going to be worse, is a guaranteed death sentence. We cannot accept that part of the bill. So what we're saying is we have been across the country. We've done 8 national marches. Like I said, Manu, you participated in one of them. We cannot have this type of a bill being presented to us and then people saying, well, we want the bill because it's going to give a pathway to 11 million. It's not going to give a pathway to 11 million. Only half the people qualify as it is now. So if we do the incremental bill that Peter Schey and Arnold were talking about, the people already in the pipeline, the dreamers, the DACA, the ag jobs people, let them have a pathway to documentation. I'm out there. I pick up the dead bodies. I talk to the woman whose son is lost in the desert, and sometimes we find him when it's too late. I'm with these families. I'm on the front lines. Not one of these people has ever said anything about citizenship. They're not looking for citizenship. They're looking to be documented. They don't want to have a crazy Joe Arpaio here, and we have crazy Joe Arpaios here in California. They want to have a way in which they can come out of the shadows and feed their families. There's 250 million undocumented people in the world. We only have 11 million. Most aren't in this country. We have 11 million. And of that 11 million, approximately 40% came with a visa. They qualified for visas. They're not from Latin America, Asia, Europe, people with money. Student work and tourist visas, and their visas expired, and they stayed. They're undocumented. The other 60% are the people crossing in the desert. The 5 people that died 2 days ago on the train from southern Mexico to northern Mexico in La Bestia, that's happening not only on this side of the border, but also on the other side of the border. And we as a people have got to practice what we preach. We're all of the same race, the human race. And if the United States wants to go around the world and talk about human rights, they need to practice them right here at home. And we're not doing that. So we say, ni una muerte más. Queremos reforma de migración que sea digna y humana. We need to have humane immigration reform. Because when the forefathers of those people that came through Ellis Island came, the United States had nothing to do with the potato famine or the religious persecution going on in Europe. But the people coming from Latin America today, the United States has a lot to do with it. Whether it was Reagan intervention in Central America, whether it's the free trade agreements, whether it's the United States with 4% of the world's population demanding more than half of the world's illegal drugs, consuming more than 1/3 of the world's natural resources, that is not right. We're only 4.5% of the world's population. We have no right to have that superior type of attitude to anybody. The March on Washington taught us that we're all human beings. We're all the same race. And we have advanced somewhat, but we've gone backwards somewhat. We see a rise in hate crimes. We see some of this legislation that's still being manifested across the country. We need to speak out because California is the leader in this issue. And unfortunately, we've led in the wrong direction, like with Proposition 187, but we can also lead in the correct direction. So I think it's important that the Latino Caucus stand up to this injustice of the additional wall, of the additional Border Patrol, and say, if we can't take that out, then we want to have the incremental immigration reform. And let's have the new president in a couple of years really give us humane immigration reform, because we're not going to forget about the other people. We're not going to forget about them. We got to include them, but we got to stop just accepting anything. We got to stop that. And I know all of you have a good heart about this issue, and the people that have spoken before me, I know they also have a good heart, but we're on the front lines. We are the ones that are with the family. So I brought a book with some of the stories, which I gave you all, and I want to tell you that these 10,000 people that have died, and that person that's dying right now, that's crossing a border right now, simply because he wants to feed his family, wants to be with his loved one, wants to be able to have an opportunity because he's being persecuted because of the violence, because of the drug war. No son olvidados. We cannot forget these people. These are human beings. These are human beings, and we will not accept the death sentence. So this immigration reform bill, the way that it is now, I'm sorry, we cannot accept it. We and a lot of the activist community, I know there's divided opinions on this, but I think it's important that we have humane immigration reform. When millions of us marched in the immigrant spring of 2006, nobody was marching for more Operation Gatekeeper. So we need to have that heard loud and clear. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Arturo Carmona, will you be able to provide testimony?
Thank you, Assemblymember Perez. I first want to also join everyone else in congratulating the California Latino Legislative Caucus for putting this hearing together. I think it's exciting to see there's a strong interest in discussing the issue, and more importantly, being a strategic pressure point for good pro-migrant legislation, as Resma alluded to in her concluding thoughts. God knows that we need more leadership statewide on the issue, not only to provide relief to undocumented immigrants from local, federal, and state police agencies, but also to show a clear, more progressive path for rejecting the notion of deportation and embracing immigrant integration. I want to say that the issue of immigration reform is not an issue about left and right. It's an issue about humane versus inhumane. It's an issue about integration versus deportation. It's an issue about family unity versus family separation. And all you have to do to prove this, you have to ask the American voter. You have to ask the Latino voter, who is clearly not all on the same page on the issue of immigration. We did a poll with Latino Decisions, one of the preeminent polling firms in the nation for Latinos, and it revealed some very startling facts. The poll focused on a strong representative sample of Latino voters from across the country, and it was significant because no one had really asked Latino voters what they actually felt on, not on the top level stuff, now that we have a 1,200-page bill, but really on the facts, on the details. I really believe that, yes, we have to have the upper level conversations, but once you start getting a bill, we need to look at the details, and we need to look at the implications that has on our families. And so when you start asking those questions about the details of the bill, you start seeing some powerful findings. 73% of Latino voters strongly reject, this continual flow of immigrants being sent to detention centers and ultimately deported. 66% of Latino voters oppose ongoing raids occurring in workplaces and homes throughout our communities in California and nationally. 78% of Latino voters would not support immigration reform that does not provide a clear and expedient pathway to citizenship. 86% of Latino voters believe that immigrants should be provided an expedient pathway to citizenship in 5 years. Not the current proposal that can range from anywhere from 13 to 15 years, as we heard earlier from some of the presenters. And Latinos oppose, majority of Latinos oppose the $2,000 fine that's currently in the bill, or that's currently being debated. The poll also suggests voters at 61% support LGBT inclusion, which we believe as an organization is an important factor. So, I think that this poll was very significant in the sense that it showed a lot of key positions about Latino voters that weren't out there, that aren't being discussed in the mainstream media. On the other hand, it also showed that Latinos voters are willing to compromise. 94%, for instance, support background checks. And good majorities support a rational, and I would highlight rational approach to border enforcement. The poll sends a powerful message from Latinos that, one to the Democratic Party and the President Obama, stop supporting policies that punish and deport immigrants and fight for real reform. And on the Republican side, it sends a clear message that extreme anti-immigrant policies have no place in today's political discourse. So, you know, the highest percentages of any questions point to a Latino community that does not want more policies that will persecute immigrants in this country, in the state. And the poll makes it very clear to us, and I think to you know, those folks that we have shared it with, that most Latinos don't want immigrants to wait more than 5 years. There is, in fact, a red line that shouldn't be crossed. And that's important to talk about, because once the bill passes that red line, then we need our leaders to speak out against it. And I think this poll speaks really, really to the heart of that issue. In terms of the policy and the politics moving forward, I'll be brief. I know that we've talked about it a lot today. I think that the Senate bill passed by the United States Senate has serious flaws for many of the reasons you have heard. While yes, there are very important things in the bill, the pathway to citizenship, new labor and family protections, protections for refugee and women workers. I mean, there's a long list of very positive things that we shouldn't minimize that are very significant. But you have to look at the facts. According to the Congressional Budget Office, 3.5 million, that's a third of the undocumented population, will be excluded from the legalization. That's the legalization process. That's not citizenship. So they will remain undocumented. Meaning that we will have millions remaining on undocumented status and deportations continuing in our communities. That's just something that we cannot accept. The citizenship provisions and process outlined in the bill, as outlined earlier today in this hearing, has transformed into a real obstacle course, which makes citizenship, the citizenship dream, an almost impossible path. And according to many experts, will exclude about half of the population from that pathway to citizenship. And so essentially the Gang of Eight bill that started kind of at a center right, that we were willing to, you know, kind of work with, guaranteeing to exclude, you know, many folks from the citizenship process as a result of a series of amendments, particularly the Corker-Hoven amendment, in our assessment, has become bordering a right-wing bill. And the Republican-controlled House is guaranteed to push the bill towards even more extremism. So we're very concerned about that. Democrats, and mainly the movement, have yet to tell us where the limits are. What are the limits that we can support? We want to know that. And so, you know, when you see Republicans like, you know, Senator Corker calling the amendment almost overkill, and John McCain saying that the most militarized borders since the Berlin Wall, and Senator Pat Leahy saying that the Corker-Hoven amendment, it's like a Christmas wish list for Halliburton. You need to begin to really look at these details. So recognizing where we're at today, after the passage of Senate Bill S-744, we believe that it's important for the legislative process to move forward. Getting members of Congress to move out and support the legalizing and pathway to citizenship of the undocumented population is important, but let's not kid ourselves. I think what we're looking at, as we've heard from many of the speakers, we're ultimately looking at a House bill that's going to be much worse. So understanding the above, that's why it's extremely important to push for more administrative and state relief. I think that states can do very concrete actions. We talked about Assemblymember Alejo's driver's license bill, the Trust Act, but also we need to, you know, I think, you know, you're seeing, you guys are following the media, you know, the projections now, you know, have the possibility of immigration reform passing, diminishing. And so we need to prepare for the reality. We need to put our feet on the ground and realize that immigration reform is going to be very difficult to pass through the House. And so we can't continue to sustain the type of deportations that are happening every day. 1,100 folks being deported every day. We need to act, and the state of California needs to play a leadership role in that. You know, so I would really urge to really escalate our fight at the state level. We need to escalate the fight for the Trust Act, for the driver's licenses. The stakes are very high for our community. So I think that I would again commend the California Latino Legislative Caucus for your leadership, and I would urge you to really elevate the voices of the Latino voter in the state. The Latino voter needs to be taken into account, needs to be listened to. More polls like this need to happen, and those interests need to be elevated not only at the federal level but at the state level. There's a lot we can do, and we need to fight harder because this is the daily lives. Just this weekend, the family of a close member of mine, a friend of mine, Paco Moreno, he has extended family, and some folks might know him. They were fishing in Manhattan Beach, and they didn't have a fishing license, a couple of them. They took the whole family, including U.S. citizen children, and they put most of the family in deportation proceedings, and now they're in the process. We're, of course, trying to help them and fight for that. This is happening every day all over California, in the Coachella Valley, in the Salinas region. And so the stakes are very high, and count on us as powerful allies in trying to really escalate this. We need to fight harder here in the state. We need to fight stronger to really protect the most vulnerable, the undocumented community in our state. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Carmona. If we could move forward, Efrain Delgado, Dreamer representative from the California Dream Network, and then afterwards we'll have Miguel Araujo and a little bit of Q&A.
Yes, hello. First, I'd like to start off by saying again, my name is Efrain Delgado, and I'd like to thank you guys for inviting me and giving me the chance to speak in front of you all. I think it's very important to bring in the youth to make us comfortable, and so once we have, make us comfortable so once we are done with our studies, we're able to come into the seats that you guys are currently filling and do a good job of doing the job that you guys are doing today. I'm a student at UC Davis right now, going into my third year. I'm the co-president of SPEAK, which is a AB 540 organization on campus. And I'm here to represent the California Dream Network. And I'll just briefly explain what the California Dream Network is to you guys. It is an organization that is statewide, which consists of different campuses across the state, which are all fighting for basic human and immigrant rights, or AB 540 students, to find a way for them to be able to attend school. And not just that, but also like basic humane rights, like the gentleman here to the side said. We're not really just in an immigrant reform. We're fighting for human rights, It's not just for people like us and from other people to be able to go to school or whatever. We want to be able to have equal rights that other people in this country have, and we're currently being denied by the people who run this country. And some of the way our organization works is we have representatives from each campus, I being the one from Davis right now, where we stay in contact with other representatives, and we update ourselves with what we're doing for immigration reform, how we're outreaching to the community and bringing in not just the students and the youth, but the parents of the youth to come in and help with the immigration reform. And to list a few of the things that we do as a group, individually and as a statewide organization, we've taken it upon ourselves to bring in, like I just stated earlier, not just the youth, but the parents and the people who came to this country to make a better life for their children, because it's also very vital to have them helping us in the reform. We outreach to them. We post out at flea markets, grocery stores, different places like that. We give out flyers to people, inviting them to community forums where we inform them about the immigration reform, because it's unfortunate, but a lot of the Latino community and a lot of the immigrant community is uninformed about how things work here in the Capitol and at the federal level. So at those community forums, we update them about how things work, how bills are written, how they're presented, and how they're voted through legislation. And so we hold those. And then at a few places up here in the northern region of California, we've been able to maintain a consistent flow of people to help us out through being members of community member groups. So like in Stockton and Tracy, we have parents and community leaders where they're helping us push for the kind of forums and stuff we want to bring in people to make the cause even bigger and make our voices heard. We also like to target Republican districts, because as we know, a lot of the Democrats are already in favor of the immigration reform and fighting for immigrant and human rights. But it's a lot of the Republicans that are going to be the votes that kind of push the thing in the right direction that we want. And what we do when we target these Republicans is we do ledge visits. When we outreach to the community, we have pledge cards where we have people who live in the districts of certain Republican representatives sign and tell them that they're the people that they're representing. They need to start making decisions not just in favor of maybe the white community or the people who are citizens, but also the people who aren't documented at the moment. When we take those pledge cards, we give them to the representative if they're in office, or to their staff. And the times we've been able to do it, we've been able to represent or present them with over 500 petitions signed, which is, I think, in my opinion, very awesome, because we need to be able to show them that there's a large population of people that they need to represent that they're forgetting about. And it's a way of putting pressure on them to remember that they're representing the immigrant community. And a lot of the stuff we do is very grassroots, but just to showcase kind of the power we have as a youth organization, we were directly responsible for bringing David Valadao to a community forum where he spoke with Representative Luis Gutierrez, where they met with the immigrant community, and they basically called out the Republicans and the Democrats to work together for an immigration reform, which is huge because nowadays you don't really see or you do, but not to the point where we'd like bipartisan cooperation between the two sides. And having David Valadao come out and speak next to Luis Gutierrez was a huge accomplishment for our organization. We also work very closely with CHIRLA. Angelica Salas spoke earlier. With them, we work a call center at their offices where members of the CDN, the California Dream Network, make calls to other people from across the country, not just here in California, where we inform them about what's going on with immigration reform. And then once we give them a brief update with what's going on, we connect them to their Congress members, which is another huge thing in my viewpoint, because people just don't really know that they have the power to be able to talk to their Congress members, and us going out there and informing them that they can, and informing them with stuff over the phone when we're miles away from each other, is just a sign of the strength that we have and the commitment we have to the movement. And not to move on to what we want, what's our objective as a California Dream Network.
You got about a minute.
Okay. It's indicated in our title that we're fighting for dreamers, the Dream Network, but we also want to fight for human rights. We feel that I personally feel it's ridiculous that a country that was built by immigrants and for immigrants has such ridiculous immigration laws where now they're trying to take people out or keep them out because it's not to their convenience. They seem to forget their history, the history of this country, and also that they're humans and they need to feel a certain level of compassion towards each other, even if we're just from another country, because we're all at the end of the day, we're all humans, and they need us to tell them or remind them that they're humans and that immigrants are no different than they are. We're just lacking a piece of paper that they just happen to be born with.